Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to each one of you to this month's Humanity 2.0, and our discussion this afternoon is with Biby Sam in a talk entitled A Balance of Stories. It's not just a talk, we want everyone to talk, we want everyone's stories coming in. Please, I would welcome you right away. Start using the comments box, post your questions. We would like to respond, and Biby would like to respond, and you will see him in a minute. I just want to tell you a few words about this platform. There is Justice Collective India, the YouTube channel onto which you've logged on. And Justice Collective India operates, I would say, on two thought platforms. Broadly, these are for sharing experiences and perspectives on the work of justice. JusticeCollective.in is a blogging platform, and we welcome reader contributions as well as expert contribution on that blogging platform. Please make a note, JusticeCollective.in. And we also have this YouTube channel where we gather at least once a month to discuss issues around justice and humanity 2.0, humanity of the 21st century. Those are the issues we want to look at. Biby, namaskaram.
Namaskaram, Som.
Som and Sam, your name being Biby Sam. I'd just like to ask you, apart from this commonality about us being Som and Sam, similar sounding names maybe, you use an expression on the social media platform Clubhouse. You call yourself a third culture kid. And we've kind of talked about it, and we discovered we may both be third culture kids, as in our parents come from a certain culture and they moved into another culture. In my case, my parents moved from Kerala to Delhi, actually. And that's the culture in which I grew up. So I was from one culture, moved into a second culture, and you'd like to tell me that makes me kind of a third culture kid. Okay. Tell us something more and what it meant to you personally, being a third culture kid. Where do you find that expression significant? Why do you even use that expression? Tell us something.
Yeah, good to hear that explanation, Som, about how you grew up in a different culture than your parents, and that's exactly the same for me. I was born in the Middle East. I was born in a country called Kuwait, and my parents being from South India, from Kerala. And when I grew up, I think my formative years was based on my experiences in Kuwait. And yes, we do have Indian communities in Kuwait as well, but you also connect with what's happening with the local people there as well. And so it creates a very different perspective, very different worldview than maybe somebody who was born and brought up in living in a monocultural environment. And so that's why I use the term third culture kid. And I was there for quite a few part of my earlier life. And then I shifted to India along with my parents, and that was an interesting experience. But there's a beauty about
this. You a fourth culture kid then?
Interesting. But there's a beauty about all these third cultures that we talk about. Those of us are TCKs, third culture kids, and that is what I call cultural agility. You're exposed to so many cultures that it's a little more easier to kind of adapt to a new culture. So that's the way I experience it. I mean, it's not that we don't have culture shocks. I think everybody has culture shocks, but we've had so many small culture shocks in our lives that we can handle the bigger ones. I don't know if that makes sense. What do you think, Som, from your experience?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think, I agree with you on that. And I think at least speaking for me, we tend to be also sensitive to what other cultures may feel. Because we know the impact of receiving a sort of cross-cultural communication, mm-hmm. and we are sensitive to how we deliver that also is one of my experiences. They talk about President Obama that, he had multiple cultures in which he grew up, and we saw him as a president who could move across different cultures, move into different countries and speak to people in a way that appealed across race, across all kinds of differences, what could be perceived as differences. So yes, I would agree with you that it does give what you are calling cultural agility. a flexibility maybe. And I think, yeah, that is helpful. Thank you. Uh, as you did this journey across cultures, you also have made a journey into the world of music at some stage, uh, starting with when you were a kid, whichever culture. How
Yeah.
did you get into music? What was the progress? What was the journey? Map it out for us.
Well, that's interesting that you should say use the term cross-cultural, and I think that's a relevant term. I tend to look at it from a little more different perspective, intercultural engagement. And so let's picture this. I'm born in Kuwait, and I'm listening to Arabic music, right? That is what is around me. I'm listening to that on the television. I'm listening to that on the streets. At the same time, one of my first memories is listening to a radio announcement. I think it was either Voice of America or BBC. I forget which one. And the intro of that announcement had a classical piece, a Western classical piece. If I remember correctly, it was Vivaldi's Spring, which is ba-rum bum bum ba-da-dum, da-da-dum bum bum ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum ba-da-dum bum bum. And then they would say, this is the Voice of America or British Broadcasting Corporation. And that also made an impact on me. Here am I listening to Arabic music and seeing and hearing that on TV. Even the cartoons had some form of Arabic music as well. And then I'm listening to the Western classical music. And then when I come to India, I listen to the folk music and the South Indian Carnatic classical music as well. So for me, I find all of this beautiful. And that's why I use the term intercultural. I find all of it beautiful. I find beauty in each one of them. There are times that you might prefer one or the other based on your moods and emotions. But that is the start of my musical journey, to be able to understand that all of this is beautiful and I love all of them. So that's a starting point. I'm sure we can have more conversation on that.
Sure, I'd like to hold on for that to that just for a moment. Which kind of music did you start with in terms of training? Before the intercultural, you need to start somewhere, right?
Right. That would be based on the way my mother used to sing songs at home. And she would sing the songs from our community, which is very similar to folk songs, in fact. And I'd probably hear it very often. So that's probably, if you want to use the term training, or that's the way my mind was attuned to listen to these things. So I would definitely say my mother singing in the local language and that style was definitely an impact.
Okay. So you use the word folk music there. And one of the things I think the audience should know is that you make contributions, you make presentations to the British Forum of Ethnomusicologists. In some sense, they accept you as one of themselves. And so it sounds, obviously, from that term that there is music or musicology on one side and ethnomusicology on the other side. What are we talking about here? Why this differentiation? What's significant about it?
I'm glad you brought that out, Som. So if any of my friends on Clubhouse, they see my profile, they see that I write it as ethnomusicology with the ethno in quotes. And that's an interesting distinction there. So if the people who know the history, ethnomusicology did stem from the idea of Western classical music being different and everything else being ethno. So they'd had a colonial kind of background. It's changed now. In fact, on Facebook, there's a page called Decolonizing Ethnomusicology. And now we accept everything as ethno. So I'll give you a simple example. When I teach in a particular film school and I teach the history of Western classical music, that is ethnomusicology for us in India, because that's not local to us. So that's why I use the term ethno in quotes. In the Indian context, I just use it as a catch-all term. And I basically help local people in recording and archiving their stories, their songs, their performance arts. That's the way I tend to use that phrase, so that it helps them to pass it on to their communities, their posterity as well. And for the rest of us to see the beauty of these songs and stories and dances. So that's the best way I can just put it into a nutshell.
Okay, thank you. and performance art, as you just said. Tell us more about that as well. What you mean by performance art?
So this is a phrase that is quite popular. A lot of cultural work is written down when you look at a lot of the Western traditions, or even some of our ancient Indian traditions as well. And what is written down, that's great and that's good, but there's a lot of things that is not written down. We are from an oral community. In fact, some people say 80% of the world is an oral preference learner, which means you prefer to hear and see things. And that shows even in the Western world. Clubhouse, this social media app, is a social audio only app. You're just hearing people talk and sing and do all of that. So this is a very important part of art, performance art, which is not always written down, hence the word performance art. And that's something that I love to specialize in, to archive, to analyze, to help promote people doing that form. So that's singing in a concert or singing in a local place, doing your paintings or your sculptures. All of that is performance art. You're performing something. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it sounds like performance is also a way of communication. And when you say it, it sounds almost obvious, but a lot of our learning systems are so based on documents and writing. The first thing we teach our children is the alphabet, not necessarily performance. Whereas what you are saying is music or maybe dance, or I don't know if you include drawn art and sculpture also as performance art, but all of these communicate without using written documents. And
that's right.
That is a significant form of communication. And in fact, what you're saying is it's a significant proportion of the amount of communication that people receive in the world, and in fact, maybe want to receive in the world.
Absolutely. Wouldn't you say, Som, that we as human beings, whichever culture we are, don't we all love stories? What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. And people log on here so that they can hear stories. We are not written down something to give people. They would like to see things performed in a sense.
Right.
Now, it's not our intention to act something out here, and that's not what this program is. But even the fact that we have YouTube channels and subscribers, and by the way, viewers, please do subscribe to this channel. The reason there are subscribers is people like these media. It may take time to listen to streaming media, to view it, but people still come for it. And not only do people come for it, you seem to go for it. If I remember right, you are in Pune, where you are based, just 3 months in a year, and
that's
9
right.
months you seem to be traveling. I mean, had it not been for the pandemic, you would have been away. What draws you back to these places? Let me just call them tribal or folk places that are kind of back of the woods, but you seem to go there all the time. What draws you there?
I think that circles around to my connection as a third culture kid. And I genuinely love and appreciate the diversity of culture. And I totally believe that these art forms, they are just a part of a beautiful mosaic that makes up this world. And I believe that when we appreciate these different forms, we're creating a bridge of understanding right across cultures as well. So for me as a third culture kid, this is just something that I just love. It's part of what I do. It's not necessarily a form of exoticism that some people have. Oh, I just want to go for the exotic. That's not the way I look at it. I look at it as all of this is beautiful at the same level, including the diverse cultures that I'm a part of, directly part of. And yes, I do travel to different parts of Asia and Africa. Many times I'm invited, many times I go, and I have some interesting stories along those lines.
Okay. Biby, would you like to play us one of these pieces, maybe from our own country, from the wide repertoire you have?
Yes, I do have something that's interesting, and this is from the northeast of India, and this is in Nagaland. And I'll mention the tribe. The tribe is called the Chakisang tribe, and I want you to listen to it, and then I'll ask you some questions to see how you respond to it. Okay, is that okay, Som?
Sure.
I'm going to pause there. And so I'm going to ask you, what did you think when you heard that?
I actually saw the eye movements of this men's ensemble of sorts actually checking each other, looking at each other's faces, and obviously trying to coordinate their voices. I'm curious to know what they might have been singing about, but from the theme of our discussion, it may have been a story of some kind. So that's what I saw. And ordinary people, not professionals or something, it looked as if this is something they just do.
I want to just tag on to what you're saying. You just said that ordinary people, but not performers. And that is what I look for, the ordinary people, as you call them, who sing, and this is part of their life. This is part of their storytelling. And so let me put the context there. This is in a district in Nagaland called Phik. This is the home place of the Chakasang Nagas, and they have various languages and dialects, but this is what you hear is the Chokri language or dialect, whichever way you want to think of that. And what is interesting about this is the story is I was there, I was invited there, and we had met these people, and they said, would you like to record some of the things that we sing? I said, yeah, sure. And I am in a house, as you can see in that video clip, backed into one corner. There is no production, there's no lights, there's none of that. It's just me with the camera backed into a corner. And these people, without any rehearsal, they just get together. They're kind of like the elders of that particular region. And they just immediately say, okay, let's do the song. And they start singing this. So they sing it as it's quite longer than the clip that I've shown you. But a couple of things that I hear is they kept repeating this word joy, which in English has a different meaning. So I asked them, what does that mean? And they said the word joy is a kind of a insect that comes during harvest time. So this is a song they sing during harvest time, right? And if you notice the way in which they were modulating their voice, they were doing the joy. And I asked them, why do you do that? And said, no, they didn't have an answer. This is the way we've done it. The song is reflecting the fact that when these insects come, the harvest is ready and we need to start harvesting. And they sometimes sing it after the harvest. They sometimes sing it while they're on the field. So it's an interesting work song that they do. So they're on the field. Picture this, they're on the field. They might be spread apart and they'll all sing in harmony like this. And for me, as an outsider, this is where the ethnomusicology part comes in. When I hear that modulation of voice, for me as an outsider, this is my interpretation, it kind of sounds like they're trying to imitate this insect jumping from plant to plant. And that's the picture that I get. They might have their own interpretation. And I did share it with them and they said, interesting. They never thought of it that way. This is part of their culture. But that's a beautiful story, don't you think so?
Yeah, I agree. And in fact, it brought back actually memories, even as you were speaking, of my own childhood. It was not just in Delhi, but even Haryana. And women walking in after a day's work, including harvest, sang a monotonous kind of song. But if I hear it today, it almost feels like I'm back home, not my parents' home, but the second culture home that I grew up in. So yes, harvest songs, these songs that tell of daily life are so valuable. And it just seems to be part of community life. I think people who walk with headphones, I think thoughts come into my mind about alternatives they could do it for providing for music. Let me ask you further. It's not just stories and expressions, but you in fact believe in the power of community singing.
Yes.
Is this a broadly held belief among ethnomusicologists, and do you want to give us some evidence, some examples of the power of community singing?
Yes, I think that's also related to how we look at our title, A Balance of Stories. And when you hear that title, what do you think so?
The title has its own meaning. So we will be coming to that, or maybe we could look at it right away if you like, because a balance of stories, it just struck me. A balance can be something left over. So,
Right.
My story is the real thing, and your story is the leftover one. Or a balance as in competing between two possibilities.
Right.
The balance could also be a mix of different things, happy mix maybe. A balance could mean any of these things. So yeah, we depend on you to tell us
So
what you would think of a balance of stories, because there's a history to that term anyway, right? Which we can talk about.
yeah, and I want to combine both questions together. The idea of balance of stories came from Chinua Achebe, who is a Nigerian Igbo author who wrote this book in the 50s called Things Fall Apart. And Chinua Achebe said that he wishes that in this century, that everybody will have a balance of stories, meaning that when you tell a story about a community, you also involve that community. Their voice also is there in that storytelling. And it's not that a person can't tell a story about another community. It's that you involve all the voices together, and then you hear these different voices. And for me, why that's very much connected is to give an example of community singing. It is connected to Nigeria. And my trip to Nigeria in 2018, I had a wonderful person who had set up a lot of this. Her name is Janet in Nigeria, who set up all of these meetings and going to her tribe, the Tarok tribe, and going to other places. But there's one particular story that I want to share. Is that okay? So,
yes, please.
I was invited to go to the town of Chibok. And Chibok, for our listeners, was this place that was attacked by this insurgent group called Boko Haram in northeastern part of Nigeria, and they had kidnapped the girls, and this village was pretty much destroyed. And I was invited many years later, this is 2018, by the village association president to go to this village and to record the stories. What is the history of the village? What are the stories that are there in this village? And I don't want to talk about the journey. It's a very interesting place because it's a war zone. But I landed up in the village, and the local person there introduced me to a singer called Martha. Her name's Martha. She immediately put her chair in the middle of a courtyard and started singing songs. And I was videoing these songs, and it's beautiful. I mean, when she was singing it, people were looking. Some people started joining in, and she had this song that talked about when Boko Haram attacked. And in fact, what she was singing is Boko Haram can come and go, but we will remain strong, and God will remain faithful. That's the way she had written that song. And as she was singing the song, I saw this lady walk towards us, limping, with a stick, in obviously in a lot of pain. And she walked past us, sat down on the bench, and started singing along with just joy in her heart. And I turned to the man next to me. I said, "What's the story here?" And I noticed that he was very surprised. He said, "This lady was bedridden for many years, and she hardly would move out of her house. And hearing Martha sing, she got up in all of that pain, came down, sat here, and now we can see her singing so joyfully." That to me is the power of community singing. And that was one of the most life-changing experiences for me in Nigeria, in Chibok.
Okay, I have to say, amazing. So what you are saying is, if I heard you right, in this Chibok tribe village in Nigeria, one lady was singing, probably after a long time, this song on the spot. I assume it was a traditional song, not something she made up. And a lady who was bedridden for a few years, on hearing this song being sung by others joining in community, she walked up almost um, nearly healed, it sounds like, of whatever it was. Well, at least for that time, she took the effort to come forward. It is tremendous, the meaning, the value attached to this. On Nigeria, we do hear of conflict and all of that. Now, we are not here to talk about that, but do tell us a bit more about Nigeria and its size, variety, whatever it is. Africa is treated as kind of far away, and I think we need to probably adopt a better perspective, I'm gathering.
Yeah, I think I do believe that we would have connections with Africa because of the monsoon winds and the ocean currents that go from Ethiopia to the Middle East to Kerala. So there must be some connection there. But Nigeria is very interesting. It is one of the most diverse countries in Africa. Officially, they say that they have more than 500 or 540 tribes. And in fact, there is a group called Stephanos Foundation in Jos, in the north central part of Nigeria, that has actually discovered way more tribes and languages. So it is extremely diverse. And when I look at that and compare that to India, it's almost like, I hope my Nigerian friends take this as a compliment, but just the similar diversity we have in India when we look at Asia, with more than 4,000, 5,000 communities, people groups, thousands of languages. And that's the same thing that I see in Nigeria. It's very, very diverse. And they do use English as an official language, but they have a different way of speaking English, the pidgin way of speaking English. And it's very interesting. It's beautiful to listen to. And that's the beauty of Nigeria, the diversity that is there.
A sort of India of Africa, some would say, it sounds like. Right. If I may stay on that a bit more, when we use the word folk dances, for example, what comes to mind is the bamboo dances of Mizoram, for example, that the women there do. This kind of collectivizing, if you like, harmonizing, like we saw the men in Nagaland doing, of voices, of performance. How often do we see that in classical Indian music and dance, if I may ask?
That is a very interesting question. I think it's completely different forms. The classical system, as you know, there's a North Indian and a South Indian version, Hindustani and Carnatic, is mostly based on a solo performer or a group of people, but they're performing one particular piece. And it's quite similar to what I've seen in certain other parts of Asia, where they focus on the melody, and the melody is supreme. And with that, they have percussion or maybe something similar to that brings it all together. But it's very melodic. And the technical term for anyone who's a musician listening is it's based on modal modalities and modes. And so I find that interesting, and there's a beauty in that. And there's also beauty in folk music, and that term folk music is also, why do we call it folk music, right? A lot of people say the people's music, or in Kerala, you would say the music from the land, Nadan Pattu, music of the land. So a lot of what I've seen in the music of the land, yes, you do have solo performers, but a lot of it has community and dancing, and it's not separated. It's not like now I sing, now I dance. Sometimes it's all together. So some of our classifications don't match up when we look at the songs of the people. That's an interesting difference between what I see in classical music, Indian classical music, and the diverse people's music, as if you want to call it that way. Even that's an interesting distinction, because a lot of people love Indian classical music. I myself am a big fan of both the forms, but it is very different.
Okay. I'm tempted to ask a slightly adventurous question, if you like. It's not just in classical music where there is a focus on melody and therefore a limited number of performers in a performance. A lot of Indian achievement seems to be individualistic, if you like, in the sense when it comes to the Olympics, and we've done well recently. Most of the medals are individual performances. So whether it's badminton or tennis, maybe not in the Olympics, but even sports in general, chess, we produce world champions in many individual sports. Some would argue that cricket is, although a team sport, it's so centered around significant individual performances. And then we go back into Indian history and we name individual philosophers, mathematicians like Aryabhatta. So what is it that makes us, I'm arguing, I could be wrong, but we seem to be somehow a little more individualistic centered in our culture rather than people collecting, maybe, rather than folksy in some sense. The achievements seem to be individual rather than team. Now, this is obviously something people would love to jump in on. And again, I hope people will jump in with their questions. Any thoughts on that?
That's an interesting perspective, Storm. When I look at it, if I look at whatever I've seen of diverse human cultures, don't we all have a tendency to follow a person who leads? I see that in many cultures. It's very strong in our Asian cultures, and in the Indian context, the guru mentality is very strong. You have a guru, you will follow that guru. And I see that happening in other places as well. We have global gurus that are part of the world today. We have social media influencers, for example, who literally capture the market. And that's an interesting thing that you mentioned about being individualistic in a collectivist society. I see that almost a contrast, a paradox. How is that possible, right? But you bring up a valid point. There is a focus that many of us have on maybe putting a particular person on a pedestal and then, listening to only what that person has to say. And that, for me, it goes back to the balance of stories. I think that's okay. You should respect people that you respect. That's fine. But it's also good to understand other perspectives. And perhaps this is just my suggestion, or just as my way of thinking. If somebody is a very influential person, perhaps it's good to have some sense of accountability with your peers. If you're a guru, maybe there are other gurus that you spend time with, and you have a sense of accountability. So that in that sense, you are not alone, but you're together. And when you make mistakes, you have somebody else to help you and take you on. I don't know if that's a perspective that interests you. So,
So you're not sort of invalidating this tendency towards individualism, but it has to be in a context of bringing it to a common pool of some kind, where you are accountable to each other and not in your own private expertise and preening, maybe, as in when you turn up in front of the audience, but there is a submitting to the wider society, maybe. Anyway, that I think can be another discussion on its own.
So I can add to that. Let me give an example of a small video clip of a person who's a solo performer and how that connects with the larger tribe. Is that okay?
Yes, please.
So this is an interesting clip from, again, Nagaland. So when you hear that, what did you notice about that?
He is playing, I would say, in a painstaking way, and in some sense, a pain-conveying song is what I could make out. I couldn't see deeper than that, so you'll have to lead us in.
Right. So this is the Ao Nagas, and what is interesting about the Ao Naga is another tribe. Ao is another tribe in Nagaland. Is again they have multiple dialects or languages, whichever way you want to look at it. And this gentleman, his name is Imnisashi, he's singing in a language called Mongsen. Now, what is interesting is he's telling a story. And in that story, he's talking about a boy and his stepmother. And the stepmother didn't like the boy. So the story is about how the stepmother told the boy to carry water from the river in a gourd, but would put a hole in that gourd so that each time the boy comes back home, the gourd is empty. And this is a storytelling style of folk song that is there. What's interesting is, even though he's a solo performer, he won't be, even if he performs it, it has to have the collective, what's the word? It has to be accepted by his tribe for it to be considered one of our traditional songs. So yes, he's a solo performer, but he's also doing it in a way that is accepted by the tribe. And what is interesting is, I use this as an example. When I show it to many of my friends who are Owl from the Owl tribe, they say, we've never seen that instrument. And I'm connecting this with the term ethnomusicology, as you said, the connection with the British form of ethnomusicology is, I'm presenting a paper at their conference and I'm talking about this particular style of singing and using that particular instrument, which is called the cup fiddle, because it's made out of a cup. And what is interesting is, this folk song cannot be done until unless everyone agrees and says, this is our folk song. So you have a solo performer, but that solo performer is accountable to the elders of that tribe. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's an example that I could give.
Right. And it's not accountable only in terms of quality control, it sounds like, but at that point, the performance belongs to the community. It's not your private property.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It belongs to the community.
Yeah, which is marvelous, actually. So the community, in a sense, is also accountable to the performer to judge correctly, to give feedback appropriately, and then to own that person in the performance in some sense, rather than the performer being subject to critics, and there's a constant competition almost between the two, where you try to keep up. This thing about many different stories, many different styles, this balance of stories, expression, and of course, it's very clear now that what we mean by balance here is not what's left over, definitely not. I'm only getting a feeling of what we may have left out is to be brought in more and more. And it's not about competition, but it is a right mix of so many equally valuable things. And I'm reminded of a TED talk, I forget the speaker's name, but the danger of a single story. And our favorite whipping boys are, of course, the colonialists, but it's so possible even within independent India to have limited numbers of stories that are out there in the balance, whereas the mix is complete only when everyone's stories are there, is what I'm gathering. And
that's absolutely right, Som. I think you brought in a very important point. You're referring to Chimamanda, who talked about the dangers of a single story. And you're absolutely right. We tend to look at the colonialists and say, they did this to us, but what are we doing, right? That's something that we need to think about. Are we telling the stories of people around us? Are we providing opportunities for the voiceless to speak? And I think this is beautiful when you look at it from an art form. To listen to the songs and the stories, the dances, the art, the visual art, the sculptures, the paintings. And when we see all of that and see, this is the beauty of what makes us India. And I'm proud to be an Indian because of the diversity that we have. And that's something we all should contribute. And I'm glad you brought up that point, Son.
Yeah. So this, I think, is worth repeating again and again in some sense. And I can't help repeating, just to emphasize for myself and everyone, that just because something is a written tradition doesn't mean it's the tradition. There are so many traditions that are communicated in so many ways. Each of them is valuable. Each of them has something to offer. And in a sense, I think we are fortunate that we are living at an age, at a time when the media are there for these stories to come forward. So we are on YouTube. These performances can be on YouTube. People can see them irrespective of where the performances took place. So it's, I would say in some sense, Humanity 2.0 means stepping forward into what the new humanity is really, where you don't just go by written stories, your stories, the textbook, but hey, look around you. There are so many media that are communicating so many things. Of course, we are aware of the negative side of it, the fake news and all that, but surely we can distinguish between fake and not if we want to. And this is something to pick up, really, that what we should use media, social media, and the new forms of communication that are available to us is to pick up, spread, broadcast the multiple stories that are there in this country across the length and breadth. And yes, I share your pride at being an Indian on this.
Absolutely. And I think you bring out a very interesting point. You talk about how Humanity 2.0 should step up. And one of the things talking about these stories is many of us have a mobile phone. This is ubiquitous, right? And imagine if we record our grandmother's stories or songs, just record it and put it out on YouTube. We're not prescribing something. We're not saying this is how things should be. We are describing, we're describing what is there in our lives. And if everybody were to describe what's there in their lives, you would have this huge mosaic, a kaleidoscope, if you may call it, of beautiful stories coming through songs and dances and all of this. And we'll be able to look at all of that and say, hey, there's beauty in all of this. And I think that's a very valid point to make, Som, about Humanity 2.0.
Mm-hmm. And descriptive and prescriptive, yes, that is terrific. Again, that can be another subject on its own. This business of telling other people what to do when you can listen to their descriptions and learn a lot. Now, you don't do only virtual collections, you've got a literal physical collection behind you. Some of our audience want to know what on earth you got behind you. Is it just furniture or is it something else?
Yes, I think I would never call it just furniture. I play all of these instruments.
They are instruments.
But yeah, they are instruments. Yes, for sure. Especially if anyone's looking at the ladder, as some people call it, the ladder. What is that ladder behind you? Those are flutes, and they are from. Most of them are from India, but some of them are from different parts of the world. Some are from Ireland, some are from the United States, some are from Turkey, and some are from China. And they're all wind instruments. I wouldn't call all of them flutes, but they're all wind instruments. And that's what's on this side. On the other side, next to my electric guitar, is two instruments. One is the dotara, which I got from West Bengal. It's called dotara, means two strings, but it actually has 5 strings. You find it in West Bengal, played by the Baul community. You find it in other parts of India as well. You find it in Meghalaya, the doitara as they call it. I have quite a few friends who play that. There's a band called Somersault who plays that as well. And next to that is a Chinese gourd instrument called hulusu, and that's got like a drone as well. So there's some interesting instruments there.
And guitar we need not talk about, right? It doesn't really count. Yeah, it would be nice to be in a place where we could say something like that. But you do talk about the appropriateness of using Western instruments, all right. But the tunes could be local. Is that one of your thinking processes?
Yes, that's a good statement that you make. I don't have any problem in mixing Western music with other forms of music as well. But when we go to the extent of not using our own local tunes, I think we are missing out on something. This is my personal opinion. I have no problems in writing an English song in a Western style, but if I were to take a local Indian language, I just instinctively think of a local tune. If you're writing a song in Malayalam, for example, it's okay to sing it in Western style, but for me, instinctively, I'm assuming that the tune is going to be a Malayalam local tune. And you can embellish it with Western chord structure and harmony and all of that. But I love the beauty when you take a tune from the local era, the local place, and then use these other instruments to embellish it.
Okay, asking purely as a layman, is that what you call fusion music?
That's a very interesting term in among musicians. Um, I want to quote a famous Indian musician, Trulok Gurtu, who said, and so this is not me saying it, this is Trulok Gurtu who said it. What a lot of people call fusion in India is confusion. And I love that quote so much that I wanted to call my band Confusion. Band members did not agree, but that would have been funny to call the band
Who's the band
Confusion.
called, if I may quickly ask?
I had a band long time back. It was called Swara Prayag, which is Prayag is when you go to the Himalayas, you see these two tributaries join a confluence that creates a bigger river, and Swara means notes. So the confluence of notes. We had a mix of different styles. But I would have loved to use the word confusion just as a homage to that term. But I think interesting point. Just taking something and mixing it together might create some very interesting songs. And I think you need to be good at the different styles that you're putting in together for it to be, in my opinion, this is my personal opinion, for it to be something that is very legitimate as a fusion of different styles. You need to be good in those styles. You can't just randomly throw things together and call it fusion music. But that's a very popular term and a very despised term by some communities.
Mhm. Okay, I'm again, the mind goes to Bollywood music, which seems to have such a smorgasbord of all kinds of music, almost. Yet, Bollywood is the one place where we seem to see folk music, if I may call it that, in the sense, and community music and community dancing. So even if the hero and heroine are in a park dancing around two trees, for the purposes of the song, suddenly an entire troupe turns up around them dancing along with them. It's almost as if the song is not complete without folk dancing. So on the one hand, the officially recognized music seems to be classical music of various kinds and classical dances. It could be, I mean, the music could be Hindustani or Carnatic, whichever, but these are the recognized ones. But there's no lack of recognition for Bollywood music, which very often seems to be dominated by choreography. People almost seem to go and are spellbound by these dance sequences, which are never solo, always community. What's going on here?
Yeah, so that's a good statement that you make. The Hindi cinema as called Bollywood, and we have other regional cinema as well, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Telugu, West Bengal. But specifically, the Hindi cinema has this dancing as very strongly part of the culture. And I think that's there in all of India. We love dancing, and each place has its own unique style of dancing. So one of the things I've noticed with the Bollywood music, and it's there with the Tamil industry as well, Ilayaraja, A. Rahman as well, many of the hit songs have rhythms that are taken from folk music. For example, if you might have a Bollywood song which has the Punjabi Bhangra style of, dancing and a lot of the rhythms from there, and all of a sudden it's a hit. Or if you're in Maharashtra, you take a song and you throw in the Nasik dhol, everyone will start dancing. You go to Hyderabad or any place where they speak Telugu, and you take the drum that they use and you play this Tinmar style of Tinmar is a dance form that you find in those areas. You play the rhythm associated with that song is a hit. And think about many years ago, we had a viral song called Why This Kolavari. Do you remember that song?
Oh, yes.
That was viral in all of India, even though it's specifically Chennai, even the English that is used for the Chennai style of speaking, but it's that rhythm and pattern, and people identified with that. And let me just say that one of the hit songs today is a song called Enjoy Anjami, written by Dee and Arivu. And it has all these songs about these words about, this is the land of my grandparents, and this is the blessing. And it's very interesting. This is my My ancestors used to play the mardalam. Mardalam is a drum that you play, double barrel drum, and it's become a hit. And guess how Arivu is saying those lyrics? He's rapping. He's not singing it folk style, he's rapping it. But the power of the lyrics, because it's connected with his community. And so I've noticed that a lot of the hit songs that we have in the different cinema music, the songs have this connection with folk music, and people just immediately connect with that. And it's always community oriented. Just to make a note on the dancing thing, India has performed in AGT, America's Got Talent, World of Dance, and they have won top honors. And they were these kids from these, I think one of the groups were kids from Dharavi who went, and you should look at their dancing. It's not just gymnastics and acrobatics. It is hardcore street dancing that they're doing in unison. It's just beautiful. You see the audiences and the judges with their mouths open, the beauty of community dancing. And that to me reflects the balance of stories.
Okay. So America's Got Talent is often individual performers, but India's Got Talent really clicks when it's a group, a community. And I think we all feel it in our bones, right? Which is why we respond, all of us respond actually to movie music. We have to admit it, to our Indian movies music. And what you're saying is somewhere inside it's tapping into that folksy side of us. We were almost meant to be in community. That's what draws us. We don't even need training. We just go into it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We are gregarious in nature. If we form groups, we form cliques, that's naturally our tendency. We were not meant to be lone rangers or solo people as human beings. We always form groups and communities. And that's the beauty of it. And India particularly has even taken some of that. America's Got Talent is one example where India performed. But back centuries ago, we have influenced parts of Southeast Asia as well. I don't know if you're aware of that story, so.
Southeast Asian influence, of course, is well known and well documented, although not fully understood. But yes, our stories are there, the Ramayana and the temples are there, for example. In terms of, what shall I say, music, I'm not sure of the presence. That if you can educate us, that'd be wonderful.
Well, let me show a particular clip that I recorded when I was in Cambodia, and this is in Phnom Penh.
Chẳng hát đạch lái mốc miền Pì cầm tam ấy rót ơi rót cái này nóng pê la ơi vili ninh há ơi họ ông.
So when you hear that song, what do you think that man is doing?
I don't know if there's a Rorschach test of some kind. So the previous song I thought was a bit melancholy, and this one also seems melancholy of sorts. A memory of something far away, maybe something lost, is what struck me.
Interesting. This is a man I was interviewing. His name is Kosal. He runs a shadow puppetry theater in Phnom Penh, and he is talking about a small part of Ramayana, because Ramayana is a national epic in Cambodia. And that part that he's singing is talking about karma. The bad karma that I have, that I'm separated from you. Karma comes in pairs is what is the translation of what he's singing. And he's doing it in a particular style. Sorry, go ahead.
There was an interruption in the line. Could you just repeat that a bit?
Yes, he was singing about karma and how there is a separation because that person is separated from the other person. But here, it's interesting, it's a section from the Ramayana that he's talking about. And so that is interesting that our stories from the 12th century, I believe, the Pallava dynasty, we were trading with that region of the world. Many of our stories went there in if you look at anything that you hear in India, it's a little different. So they've taken that story and they've made it their own. And that's also an interesting thing, right? These were not written down. They probably heard it through storytelling forms when our people went over to that side. They took it and they made it their own. And now that's uniquely their style, with their culture, their way of presenting it. And that's an interesting way in which we can share stories. So even if you have a story and I have a story, we share that story. Maybe I might have a different perspective about that story, but at least I'm sharing and I'm listening to your stories. And through that, we're creating a dialogue.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's so valuable. Even a watertight compartment between, let's say, India, Cambodia, and national boundaries. Stories don't know any boundaries. It's very clear. Performances don't know any boundaries. People accept it across the seas, wherever they are. So this is so valuable in a world where instead of enjoying each other, shall I say, and enjoying each other's stories, we want to be possessive about our stories versus other people's. And there's definitely a danger that we'll be left over with a balance of what's not very worthwhile if it goes on like that. So that is so valuable to hear it that way.
Yes, what's interesting
can we?
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Yes, do we want a glimpse of Mollywood as well? As in, I mean the world of Malayalam cinema. You have, you also work in so-called mainstream performance industry to some extent. So would you want to tell us something, show us something of your contribution?
Okay, interesting that you should say that I am connected with mainstream. I was part of a Malayalam film as a music director, and that movie was called Shutter, directed by this wonderful man, Joy Matthew, who actually is not mainstream. He was famous as an actor in a 70s Malayalam film called Amma Ariyan. And so this is a beautiful story and has lovely, interesting stories about culture, very specifically located in Calicut or Kozhikode, as we say it in Kerala. And so even the language that they speak, the dialect that they speak is very much related to Kozhikode. So this is probably I can play you the trailer and show you how what is interesting about the way in which I worked on this trailer. So this is the music of the trailer.
നമ്മള് സത്യം പറയേണ്ടി വരും. പ്രതിസന്ധികളെ അഭിമുഖീകരിച്ചാലേ അയാൾ ജീവിതം പഠിക്കും.
അങ്ങനെയൊക്കെ സംഭവിക്കും സാർ.
അങ്ങനെ സംഭവിക്കാനാണ് സാധ്യത. ഇതൊക്കെ വളരെ കരുതി കൂട്ടിയിട്ടുള്ള ഏർപ്പാടാണെന്നാണ് എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നത്.
അയ്യോ, ഞാൻ അത്രക്കാരനല്ല സാർ.
Yeah, that was the trailer of Shutter. It was a 2012.
Biby Sam, as in instead of Bibi, it's Biby Sam. Okay.
Yeah.
So what was your role in that movie?
Yeah, the entire music is composed by me, and that particular trailer was edited by me myself. I had done it to send it to the director and saying, "Hey, this is my the way I envisioned the trailer," and he liked it, uh, Joy Matthew, and he put it up online on YouTube, and that's why. And then I told him, "I'm doing this. Can I show it?" And he said, "Yeah, sure, go ahead." What's interesting is when you listen to it, what do you feel? So, what are the emotions you feel when you listen to the music?
There's definitely a thriller element to it, is what I would say.
Okay. Are there instruments that you probably don't hear normally? Could you make out anything?
I would not be the right person to pinpoint that, but tell us.
Yeah, I used a few instruments that are not common in our subcontinent, and there's a didgeridoo that's providing a particular sound, which is everyone knows is from Australia, and I use a Chinese fiddle as well to give certain melodic patterns. So what is interesting is we talked about fusion, and I was trying to give us a little bit of an interesting feel to how this sounds by incorporating those elements. And I did that with multiple instruments in the entire movie. I used the clay pot, the gatang, as a metaphor for the heartbeat. So when there was a place in the movie where there's a lot of tension, I kept having the sound of a gatang being struck to kind of denote that that's the person's heart. It was a very interesting experience. I loved it. Of course, the movie did run for more than 100 days in Kerala and won an award at the International Film Festival of Kerala. It was a great experience, but would I call it mainstream? I think a lot of people would not call that a mainstream style of even composing music. It was very different. But yes, that's my contribution to mainstream, as you call it.
Okay, great. We have not many minutes left for this event, so I would request everyone viewing this to put in your comments or questions. And maybe one of the questions that has come in is, how can all of us, in some sense, amplify some of this music, maybe amplify some of the concepts we are talking about, even about the balance of stories, about the agility of stories to move across borders, all of this. What can we do with this? Is there a takeaway for people who are viewing this?
I like the fact that the word used is amplify. That's a very strong word. That comes from the idea that there are these voices and sounds, but we need to kind of make it larger and louder. For me, the way I look at it is we are in an age of a social media explosion, right? This is the age of social media. And this is where you can record things and just put it up, whether it's on YouTube, on Vimeo, on Clubhouse. You can have discussions about this on Clubhouse. And like I mentioned earlier, rather than prescribing, this is the way it should be, we should describe more. These are the stories that I have heard. This is something I've recorded. And when we put that out more into social media, I think they'll have a lot of people who are going to be listening to it. Yes, you might get negative comments. That's always going to be there. But I'm sure you'll have a lot of people who say, wow, I've never heard this before. Just as the example that I did with the Ao Nagas, when I play that, when I clip, and they say, we've never seen this instrument before, and that's because it's only there in a few villages among the Ao Nagas. And some of them said, wow, this is my heritage. I'll give you another example. You saw the Kosal singing the shadow puppetry song in the Ramayana, and I played it to a young person, and he said, there's a disconnect between the youth and the older generation because of the Khmer Rouge and all of that has happened. But when I hear that, even though there's a disconnect, the young person was saying he's more interested in K-pop, and that's fine. But when he heard this, he said, you know what? This reminds me that Cambodia was a beautiful place and I have a rich heritage. That's it. He didn't have to like it. He loves K-pop. but just the connection he himself made to say that this is my heritage. I am proud of being Cambodian. I think that is something that we can do. I didn't do anything. I just showed him the piece. That's it. He came up with the interpretation himself. Imagine if we were to do that and allow people to have their own interpretations. That's okay. I might have my own, and we can discuss it and dialogue about it. But what I'm doing is describing. And so if all of us can have that kind of attitude and amplify the voices on social media in that manner, where we're saying, this is not my way or the highway, but this is a story I heard. What do you think about this? That's one of the ways. I mean, I'm sure people can come up with many other ways.
Mhm. Yeah. There's a question from the audience, and in a way, it's a personal one. When you see runaway hits of music on one side, mainstream, and you say you're not mainstream, does it cause any kind of disconnect, frustration, whatever for you? How do you feel?
This ties into what I call fancy word. It just means they call it the dominant aesthetic. We tend to tune our ideas of beauty based on what is dominating in that culture. Let me give an example of Bollywood music. I like some kinds of Bollywood music, and I do like different composers that are there. Even in the South, A.R. Rahman, Ilaiyaraaja. They're beautiful composers. Their songs, many of their songs are runaway hits. But there is a difference between saying that just that is beautiful and not that raw singing that I heard in somebody's house, which doesn't have production value. As some people say, it doesn't have production value. That's okay. If I can find beauty in that, then I'm fine with the fact that there are runaway hits. That's okay. That can be the dominant aesthetic for many people. But it's my duty to say, okay, I love that, but I also love this. Why don't you listen to this and hear this story as well? So is there a frustration? Yes, there might be frustration. I'm human. I think we're all human. We do have frustrations. But if we look at it from a positive angle and say, let us be the champions there of telling our stories. Let's not just be held down by frustration. Let's not just be held down by these hits that happen and nobody else is listening to the other song. Let's continue. Let's persevere. And I think perseverance is something that is very valid in today's day and age. Yes, there's a lot of things on social media, but we need to persevere, one. And two, we need to have communities. We can't persevere by ourselves. We need communities, and with communities is where we get that sense of satisfaction that people are listening. So community is important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we'll have to learn from you how to locate and, in a way, extract these minority voices, if you like, not minority as in the political connotation, but if I go as a tourist to the Northeast or somewhere, I'm presented the touristy stuff and what the tourism department thinks I should listen to. But how on earth do we discover more? And yes, once we discover, we can bring it out. So that's some food for thought. And Mollywood apart, you've also discovered in the tribal parts of Kerala some pieces of music. You want to tell us about that? Play us something? Tell us the context.
Absolutely. As I was traveling in the high ranges of Kerala, a place called Idiki, for those of you who are familiar with Kerala, this is the Nilgiri Hills are connected to that region as well. I was with a group of people who was invited to just listen to some of the stories and these folk songs that are there. In Kerala, they call it Nadan Pak. And while we were talking, they said that, do you know that there's a huge tribe that lives nearby? I said, yeah, I've heard of them. They're called the Mannan tribe. Now, the Mannan tribe is a tribe that has a recognized hereditary king. And the person is recognized even in the state assembly. He has the authority to meet the people at the state assembly. And I said, this is interesting. I'd love to hear what songs they have or the stories. We decided to go and try to contact people there. We just, decided to go in. And we were able to find the mantri, as he calls himself. His name is Rajapan. And he was just so happy to sit down and tell of his stories. He said a lot of people have interviewed him and it's come out in written form, but very few people come with a camera and say, can you sing your stories, or tell your stories? And so, yes, I do have a clip of Rajapan telling a story. But this is interesting. What he's doing is he's telling the history of his tribe, the Mannan tribe. And this is how he does it. He does it in a very interesting fashion when you listen to this.
ಹೇ ನಾಡನಾರಾರ ಪಾದಂಜುಲಿ ಆಡುವೇನೆ ಆಡುವೇನೆ ನಾಡ ಪಂಜಂಬುಲನ್ ಪೇರ ಚೊಲ್ಲಿ ಆಡುವೇನು ಹೇ ನಾಡನಾರಾರ ಪಾದಂಜುಲಿ ಆಡುವೇನೆ ಆಡುವೇನೆ ನಾಡ ಪಂಜಂಬುಲನ್ ಪೆರಿಯ ನಂಗನ್ ಪೇರ ಚೊಲ್ಲಿ ಆಡುವೇನು ಹೇ ನಾಡ ಕೊಟ್ಟ ತಟ್ಟೆ ಬರುವ ಪಂಜಂಬುಲಾನ್ ಆಡಿ ಪಾಡಿ ಬರುವ ಪೆರಿಯ ನಂಗೋ.
So what's interesting is he's telling me the history and the connection that the Pandya kings from the time of the Pandyas sent them into the Kerala region or the Chera region at that time. And the song is saying that whichever land you're going to, please welcome my people. And it's if you listen to it, you can pick out some words if you're familiar with either Malayalam or Tamil, but the language is Mannan. It's their own language. There are some words that are similar to Malayalam and Tamil, but he's singing the history. And guess what? Each time he told the history, he sang it. So the history is not spoken, the history is sung. And I think that's a beautiful story that people need to hear as well.
Mhm. Yes, clearly it was not Malayalam because I could not follow much. So we know that languages, there's a chance of losing languages like this. So clearly Kerala doesn't have only Malayalam. We have this gentleman's language as well. What about these stories, the music? There's a question from the audience. Will this man's son sing the same song, the same story? Will it be still passed on, or is there going to be a loss?
That's a beautiful question. In some of the cultures that I've worked with, yes, there is an active way in which they are passing on the stories and the songs and the styles. But it's a very interesting question because in many other places, I see that a lot of the young people, they go into cities and they get a more mainstream education, let me call it that, because that's what it is. And they come back with this disconnect with what they call more of nostalgia. And I've interviewed quite a few of them. That is probably going to be one of the things that is going to happen in some of those cultures. Some of these things are going to be lost. So this is what I challenge people. At least record what you have. At least record what you have with your mobile phones or with whatever instrument that you have to record. Record it and keep it because this is your heritage. Same with me. This is my heritage, right? The songs that I've heard. If I record it and keep it, at least I'll know that this is how it was. This is the tradition. And if you can spend time and get the stories behind it, that's something that can connect and give you that identity. Because one of the important questions today is, what is my identity? In this era of globalization, what is my identity? Can I truly be global and local at the same time? Some people call that glocal, whatever that means. But is that true? And I believe so. As a third culture kid, you can be global and you can be local at the same time, as long as you take the effort to remember these stories through videos or through social media or any other form. That would be my way of looking at it. Other people might have other answers, but that's my perspective.
Tremendous. I mean, maybe my respect for your work has increased, not because only of your knowledge of musicology, but I see that you are almost an ethno-historian, capturing history the way they would want it to be captured, not conducting interviews, doing surveys and putting it in papers, but really, like that gentleman from the Mannan tribe said, somebody needs to come and take me on camera. And that is real documentation. So I think we are waiting for a lot of treasures to come forth, maybe, a real documentation within quotes of ethno music in its many forms. I think, if there's ways the world at large needs to help in this, I think that should happen really. Now, that's the ethnic music in the wider world. Right behind you, some of those flutes or any of the instruments. An audience member is curious to know, can you play any of them? Would you be able to play it for us?
I won't play it live, but I'll definitely, maybe sometime in the future, you might see a video of me playing that
Okay.
on YouTube. But I wouldn't play it live. For me to do justice to that, it has to have a good mic to capture the sound. It's not the same mic that we use. So that's a different setup altogether. But maybe sometime in the future.
Okay, we are definitely going to look forward to that. And I'm tempted to think that Justice Collective India platform needs to extend itself. So right now I said justicecollective.in is a blogging platform. Humanity 2.0 is our platform of this kind via YouTube. But somewhere we need to let people come in and contribute, not just written blogs, but other ways of communicating their stories so that we have it up on our platform. I think that will be a real fulfillment of what this platform is meant for. And then we have a balance of stories, a balance of ways of telling stories, maybe. And I'm just, just not even a week ago, there was this headline: failure to deal with diversity is the root cause of wars. The UN has been told. And that was a former president of South Africa who had said that. And he started right from the 1960s, the Biafra conflict in Nigeria, and went on through the decades to say that failure to deal with diversity is the root cause of a lot of problems, and especially wars. Do you have any closing sort of thoughts around that?
Well, absolutely. I mean, that is something that's very close to my heart. I also work as an intercultural engagement facilitator. And what I've noticed is a lot of conflict comes from not understanding culture. We think it's personality, but it's actually cultures. And this is where I talk about the beauty of art forms and beauty of stories. Sometimes when we sit and just dialogue, sometimes we might be very close to listening to somebody else talk. But a lot of art, it stimulates the heart, it stimulates other parts of the brain. So this is what I believe. And I'm repeating a statement that I said before. Every art form is a story from a particular culture. And that culture is an equal part of the mosaic that makes this huge world. So my belief is when you appreciate the beauty of this diverse stories, the diversity in these stories, when you appreciate that, that is how you start building a bridge of understanding across cultures.
And in the same presentation and speech in the UN, the point made was, failure to deal with diversity. Now, one solution is eliminate diversity, think about uniformity. Whereas that's not what's being said here. You mentioned Nigeria and the care they take to balance across the 700 tribes or languages or whatever it was. We need to have everyone in. And diversity can be a source of strength. The corporate world is saying that all the time, that diversity and inclusion. And when we don't pick that up, then what is a source of strength ends up becoming a source of conflict and weakness. And that is so painful to think that all of this diversity that we have can be brought together into a beautiful balance of stories, and we should not throw it out of balance. Biby, it was wonderful talking to you. I have learned so much, and I'm sure our audience also has. We would continue to welcome everyone, not only to join our events and read what's on justicecollective.in, but we welcome participant contribution of every kind. We really want a balance of stories. Once again, thank you to our audience also. You've been a wonderful audience, contributing questions and just being there. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Biby. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Storm, for having this conversation.